if we don't know anything about the death itself, what about Lacey's life right before the death, which is everything we've been talking about? And that's why this leads to so much speculation and there's all these different ideas and theories and people because we don't have the physical part of this beyond just where her remains were found and how long they had been there.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to True Crime Unsolved. I'm Miles Reef. I'm here as always with my buddy Sean Cahill. This is the place where we tackle the stories that the TV networks won't touch. Unsolved homicides, missing persons cases, stories without an ending. Sean, what are we getting into today?
It's a long-awaited episode, Miles. This is what we normally call like a theories and suspects video or a persons of interest video, but it's actually going to function kind of as our final sort of capstone to the Lacey Anderson suspicious death case, which is believed by the family and by many people to actually be a homicide case and has been investigated as such. So, in this video, we're going to go over all of the different persons of interest that have come up over the years, why they were a person of interest, why they haven't been charged with anything, and then also some theories, theories that have been just sort of out there in the general public knowledge, things we've heard from commenters, from the family. I do want to sort of give a little disclaimer up top that all of this information is really coming from our interviews with Lacey's family and from their personal experience that they've had over the years during the investigation into her death, as well as some from sources directly in the area, people who knew Lacey back in the day, maybe who grew up with her, went to high school with her, and other people that have sort of confidentially reached out to us behind the scenes to share more about this story and more context, which we've been really grateful for. So, with that being said, let's dive into this because we have a lot to talk about. Miles, you want to just give us a little background, just a
Yeah,
refresher, maybe?
why don't we start with a little recap on it, just for everyone, just to kind of catch up. So on August 23rd, 2009, 19-year-old Lacey Anderson, she disappeared after leaving her mother's place. Now, her mother said that she was headed to her boyfriend's house at the time. Her boyfriend at the time was a gentleman named Jamie, who we will get into a little bit down the line. The next day, Lacey's family expected her at a family event. Now, despite Lacey's involvement with, you know, drugs and, the people that she tended to hang out with and the troubles that she had had over the years, everybody in her family has all they have all told us the same story that Lacey always showed up for family stuff. She stayed tight with her family. So when she didn't show up for this event, everyone was very concerned and they did contact the police. The police told them that they had to wait 24 hours before she could be considered a missing person. So that was the last time anyone saw Lacey alive. Lacey's body was found 3 months later, very close to where she actually grew up. So it was near her childhood home where her body was found. Her body was actually found by a father and son who were checking the fence line on their property. From what we've heard, and this was corroborated by Lacey's dad in the interview that we conducted with him. I don't know if you guys have watched that, but if you haven't, you should go back and watch it because there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. But her remains were in really bad shape. And apparently, according to her father, they had been kind of scattered by wildlife. And, I don't want to get too into the details of it, but it wasn't a good scene. Let's put it that way. The death certificate says unknown cause of death. Now, according to family members, police investigators at the time told them that it was a likely homicide. And that's sort of what's been thrown about quite a bit that, it was said that this was a probable homicide. But the official cause of death says unknown on all the paperwork.
Yeah, exactly. And so, without knowing exactly what happened to lead to her death, it does present a couple problems, and we're going to run into them as we go through these persons of interest. It sort of ties investigators' hands in a way where if they can't say definitively what led to someone's death, they have to try to find other angles to sort of figure out how they got there not alive anymore. So the first person that we're going to talk about is what I guess a lot of people might consider to be the first obvious step here, her current boyfriend, a guy named Jamie, who we've talked about before. Now, the reason that Jamie became a person of interest so quickly is because when Lacey left her mother's house on the last day that she was seen alive by her family, she told her mother she was going to Jamie's place. Jamie, according to the family, from their perspective, would then probably be the last person to see her alive. Jamie is also the boyfriend. And let's just be honest here. That is usually where you start when a young woman turns up dead. It's the husband, the boyfriend, and you clear them first and then move out from there. most homicides are the people close to us, and it's often the spouse. And so they wanted to look into Jamie. Interestingly, Jamie was given a polygraph test by investigators. He passed that. He also was the subject of a couple search warrants over the years to just see if they could find any evidence of anything related to Lacey's death at his residences, and nothing, to our understanding, was ever turned up. We heard that from a couple people close to the matter. Nothing came of that. So that's interesting that he passed a polygraph test. No evidence has been found. I think he's in the position where, like I said, you're sort of in the hot seat when your spouse or your girlfriend or your boyfriend appears to have been murdered. And I think for Jamie, what we've been told is that this has sort of hung over him over the years. People still bring this up, and there is a perception that he has to deal with because no one has been caught for this, and it has not been proven that it's anybody else. And so Jamie has had struggles of his own. He's done some time. From what we understand, he's currently out and living, his best life, trying to move on and work and do what he can. But until there's a resolution in this case, he's still dealing with this, as is Lacey's family. It's the unknown here, I think, that is a point of tension for everybody involved in this story. So it's a proof problem at this point, right, Miles?
Absolutely. The next suspect that we want to cover is Lacey's ex-boyfriend, John. Now, John had a long history with Lacey, and John was actually involved in the drive-by shooting that Lacey was facing charges on. Now, John was actually being held at the time that Lacey disappeared, facing those charges. He hadn't been sentenced yet, but he was locked up. Now, Lacey was actually going to have to face those charges as well. And that's part of what was going on in her life. Now, you guys who have watched our other videos on this case or who are familiar with the case know that this is a big thing that plays very strongly into a lot of the theories around Lacey's death, because basically Lacey had been involved in this drive-by shooting. Her ex-boyfriend was there in the car, and we believe that the other person in the car was also his brother, and he was actually locked up when Lacey disappeared. So we know for a fact that John couldn't have done it hands-on because he was actually locked up at the time. But a lot of people believe that perhaps John had something to do with Lacey's death because if it's true that she was speaking to the police, and again, we're not saying that Lacey was an informant, we're not saying that Lacey was, snitching in any type of way, but we have seen things that said, she had told the police certain facts, right? She had told the police certain facts about the case. She had told the police why the drive-by shooting happened in, her side of it, which was a jealousy situation. She perhaps had been spending time with another guy. John had found out about that. Then John insisted that she go with him to go shoot up this guy's house. So that's what we know about the cause of the drive-by.
John is such an interesting one, Miles, because, on paper, it seems like he has the most obvious motive. I mean, he's the one involved in the drive-by. He's already demonstrated a willingness to shoot a gun at a residence with people in it. In fact, we also confirmed that there were children present in that house, which I think we weren't quite sure about before, but there were. And so this is a guy who's willing to shoot at a house like that. And Lacey is talking to the police about a case that he is charged with. So, what a strong motive, right? But the fact that he's in prison and no link has ever been made between him getting somebody else to do it. Again, we're talking about a proof problem here, right? So, as
Right,
intriguing as that is, what do you do when there's no real link besides just, oh, wow, what a motive? Plenty of
right.
people have motives in murder cases that turn out not to be the killer. So,
Well, and it's
we don't,
also it's one of those things where, okay, this is guys like perhaps a low-level drug dealer, and he's locked up, and if he gets somebody else to go out and do his dirty work, and there is a strong investigation on that, you would think that eventually, some rock would be overturned and someone would talk, right? Because these probably aren't like, we're not talking about like, the New York Italian mafia where people are living by like some, strong code. I mean, this is like a small town. We're talking about meth. It seems to me that if there was a large group of people that had to be involved in this and he was coordinating some sort of hit, it would be easier to find someone who is willing to talk. But who knows? I mean, it's no one's heard anything.
yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough
Yeah.
one. So let's move on down to some of the more, I guess I would call it exotic sounding theories, although
Yeah.
if some of the people in town are to be believed, this might not be so exotic. I think as an outsider to this community, it seems like something from a movie. But again, we've heard from so many people in Madison County that this stuff is going on to some level, and it sounds crazy, but it is true. And what I'm
Yeah,
talking about
but I think
specifically,
it is, it's hard for people who don't live in that part of the country because you think of that part of the country and you think of, the country, you think of like Americana, you think of open spaces and cows and farming. And what Sean's about to get into sounds really far-fetched, but from doing some research, it's true as far as like these elements being in that area and them actually like dealing drugs out there and stuff. It is true. It is a problem and it is something that's based in fact.
that's right. And so, not to bury the lead, but we're talking about allegations of cartel activity, or if not cartel, then really big rings of drug traffickers, just to use a separate term, because we actually don't know who these people are, where they're coming from. Are they native to that area? Is this an international ring that moves through that area with their product? We don't know, but we've heard a lot about just the highly organized level of methamphetamine trafficking, to be just to put a fine point on it, that's going on in Madison County and the surrounding areas as well. And so because Lacey and her boyfriends were all sort of connected in one way or another to methamphetamine and using it, and in some ways getting involved in the trafficking side of it, obviously it comes up, did Lacey know too much about this, and is it possible that people started talking about her cooperating with the police for the drive-by, and that sort of morphed into or was perceived by the wrong people to mean, okay, well, this is someone who's going to talk to cops and she knows about what we're doing. That's a problem. Now, again, this is speculation, right? We don't know anybody in the trafficking world who's come out of the woodwork and told us this, but we do know that Lacey was afraid of that. We know because her family told us. And we know that because people in her circle and her friend group back in the day have come forward and said, yes, we remember everybody talking about this, and it was a very big deal. So these are coming from human sources that were there, firsthand sources. Um, again, we don't know specifically who would have been responsible. We've heard some people privately tell us that they believe people from out of state may have actually come to take care of this problem for
Right.
this ring. People from as far down as Texas potentially driving in to handle the Lacey situation and then leave, which would explain, if true, why this has been so hard to crack, because it might not have been anybody directly connected to her. It may have been that her reputation grew to such a point that people who she had never met before took issue with it and found a way to solve that problem. Again, it sounds so crazy and it sounds so conspiratorial, but this is an unsolved crime. And this is just one of the areas where we feel like we have to bring it up, as crazy as it sounds. And I will say, a lot of people that we've spoken to do not think that it's that crazy of an idea. And they're the ones who live on the ground in this place. And so you kind of have to give some credit to that. You have to take that seriously.
Yeah, and I would just add to that Nick, Lacey's brother-in-law, he went out on the street and he talks about this very openly. So I'm not, putting him at risk or anything. Like this is stuff that he talked about in his interview with us. He went out and, kind of like did his own surveillance on some of these guys, and he named some names in the video that we did with him and Felicia, Lacey's sister. And, he was pretty convincing that these guys are out there on the ground and they are representing a larger organization. So, take from that what you will. If they were aware of Lacey, if she was on their radar, these were not nice people from everything that we can understand.
Yeah, and I guess one other thing I'll say is that it has a ring of truth to it to me, because so many of the people we've spoken to are really afraid to even talk about it. I mean, there's sometimes in these cases more crazy rumors and people are just like willfully speculating, and it's kind of
Yeah.
like, okay, well, this is like so fantastical. I'm happy to talk about it. This felt different. Everyone we've heard from in regards to this particular theory is super duper concerned that nobody find out that they're talking about it. They are afraid. They are afraid of these people who are in their community. And so, for that reason alone, I take it really seriously. I can't say for sure that that means those people are responsible for Lacey's death, but it does sort of make me feel like these guys aren't making it up, that this is actually going on there to some degree or another. And now whether Lacey fell afoul of these people or the answer's in another direction, that remains to be seen. But it does have a ring of truth, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I have no doubt just from having spoken to so many people about this and, doing my own research, as you and I both have, that these people are out there, that they are operating in this area of the country, and there's a real presence, and this is an issue. If they knew who Lacey was and they thought that she was potentially a threat because she was at least telling the police something about, this drive-by. So maybe she was a threat in other ways because she was sort of tied up. I mean, look, it's a small community. They probably, the people who were dealing the drugs there are probably pretty familiar with most of the people who were doing drugs for regular periods of time. Lacey was using since she was what, 12 years old? Her parents told us that. So, here's someone that's been, in that scene for a really long time, pretty well known to everybody. It's a small community, word gets around about stuff, rumors start. Who knows? It's as plausible as anything else that we're going over, in my opinion.
Right on. Yeah, I know you're totally right. And I think the problem here is that there's just no paper trail. There's no named suspect. It's a broad general theory, but where do you begin with that? I mean, it's just kind of something that's known and theorized about, but without having a person, without seeing a vehicle or having a license plate, any of these things where normally it's like we can grasp onto it and follow the thread. We don't have that here. So for now, it's going to remain as a possibility that has yet to be, resolved.
Right. And look,
Um,
that's why these videos are called suspects and theories, right? Because it's not suspects and answers because we don't know, which
yeah,
is
we
why
don't know.
it's why it's still an unsolved case and we're talking about it. So I think the next thing that we should talk about is the idea that there may have been people in Lacey's immediate social circle, right? And we're not talking about one of the boyfriends. We're not talking about the present boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend, the rival for Lacey, any of that stuff. We're talking about like just people that she hung out with and she partied with and she did drugs with. And again, it's come up in our comments, in Reddit threads, all kinds of stuff that perhaps Lacey overdosed. It was maybe accidental, and then the people that she was partying with like freaked out, took her body and dumped it where it was eventually found. Obviously, that is a possibility. I don't think anyone believes that Lacey walked out into that field and to the woods and overdosed. And she said, "I'm going to go out here and on this fence line and I'm gonna kill myself." I don't think anyone believes that. But the idea that maybe she died somewhere else and then her body was brought there, I think that's something that a lot of people believe may have been possible. So when we did interview Lacey's mom, Pam, she did mention that when she was looking around trying to get answers and trying to find out where Lacey may have been that night, where she may have gone, who she may have been with, that she got brushed off and even like kind of cut off by a lot of people. And she, took a lot of notice of that. And it kind of started thinking like, well, why don't people want to help me? And why are people kind of cutting me off? And of course, her suspicions started to rise because of that, and she started to think, well, maybe these people know something, which of course led to her thinking, well, maybe they were involved, right? So I think that speaks to the idea that like maybe there's other people in the social circle that may have been involved. Now, does that mean that they were? No, maybe they just know something. Maybe they just didn't like the idea of their drug using friend's mother coming around and knocking on the door and asking questions because they're methed out and paranoid and they just don't want any involvement in it, because they're like, hey, that's bad news. Something must have happened. I don't want to talk to her, right? We don't know, but it's understandable why Pam would be suspicious of that and why she would start thinking, well, if they don't want to talk to me and they're kind of putting up these walls and refusing to communicate, that perhaps they know something and perhaps they were involved. I think you have to at least give it some thought of why people would be doing that, right? But at the end of the day, not talking to Lacey's mom is not a crime, and it's certainly not an admission of guilt in any way, right? And as I said, this is a social circle where everybody's kind of like probably using to on some level, and they're all kind of paranoid, and it's not the most reliable group of people that we're talking about here, right? So Having said that, I think we should talk about the idea of larger corruption, okay? And I know that's something that you guys really, really want to talk about because it's something that has come up over and over again in our comments. And honestly, anytime we cover a case in this part of the country, this kind of stuff comes up. And I don't know if there's something in the water out there or, if people just have a really hard time with authority out there, but it seems that it's a recurring theme. Whenever we cover a story in this area, it always comes up that, hey, the local authorities are corrupt. You got to look at this person. You got to look at that person. Now, having said that, Sean and I have absolutely no evidence that there actually is any real corruption in Madison County. We don't know that anyone, in a public office was involved in covering up Lacey's death. We don't know that anyone in a public office was involved in Lacey's death. We've gotten a lot of private messages. We've gotten a lot of comments of people, saying things along those lines and sort of pointing us in directions. What we can say is that we have read multiple articles, including a lot in the Norfolk Daily News, about corruption in the local government. So this is something that has come up. There have been articles written about it. There's also an amazing piece that we found, and I'm just going to pull it up here real quick. Now, this is a piece that was written by a guy named Katie Burr, and it's kind of like a personal blog. It was put up in 2017, and it's called Madness in Madison County. And there's a lot of information in this, and it's footnoted, and there's a lot of info here. Okay, that's all I have to say. And we'll pin it in the description, and we can pin some of those Norfolk Daily News articles too. But what I will say is that a name that's come up again and again in the coverage that we've read is a man named Joe Smith, who is the county attorney. And there's a lot of allegations around this guy. Now, again, we're merely speaking about what we've read and a lot of the conversations that we have with people and a lot of the comments that we've gotten and a lot of the private messages and private conversations that we've had. Now, some of the stuff that people are talking about, some of the stuff that we've read kind of points to collusion between drug cartels and the local government, right? So the idea, if you want to try and link it to Lacey's death, is that if she was a problem, maybe that's the reason that the case hasn't been solved. So it kind of ties back into what Sean was talking about just before this, which is the idea of the drug cartels operating there and them seeing, if Lacey was possibly talking, then, she needed to be stopped. If Lacey's death has never been solved, then perhaps that points to this alleged collusion between the local government, between the authorities there, and these drug cartels who are definitely operating in that area. So that's the most that we can really say about that, but as I said, we will pin this stuff in the description, and you guys can do some reading on your own. Again, I really recommend that you check out this blog by Katie Burr, Madison County.
It's just such a concern for some of our viewers. So many people have brought it up, and the specific, names like Joe Smith and their concerns about him. But I think what's important for us is not to litigate whether or not, there is corruption in that county and what that might specifically mean and who might be involved. Just read those sources for yourselves, and you'll understand why some people are wondering if this case hasn't been solved because maybe someone has prevented it from being solved, I guess is the best way to put it. We don't know. There's no evidence of it other than a lot of people's suspicions talking about it. So that we can confirm we have heard. The rest, it's tough. It's tough to say for sure. Let's talk about something that I guess would be the newest thing we've heard about, which is kind of it presented a challenge for Miles and I'll say that. And this is a piece of evidence that we obtained from Mike and Barb, Lacey's dad and his wife, that was sent to them in 2024. And it was actually recorded several years before that. What this evidence is several different recordings, audio and video, of somebody confessing that they were with Lacey the night that she died, and they believe they know exactly what happened because there were other people there too, and they saw everything short of her actually being murdered. Um, it's a challenge for Miles and I because obviously, it begs the question, can you guys play it for us? We feel that it would be irresponsible to do that and unethical, precisely because this is a story about somebody who was possibly murdered for giving information out that wasn't supposed to get out. We don't want to put this person in jeopardy by doing that because we do think this, they could possibly be identified from these recordings. And if the people they're talking about were indeed involved in Lacey's death, well, it stands to reason they could be in danger as well for talking about it. These recordings were sent to the family. The family obviously took this very seriously. They handed it over to the investigators who did look into it, but we don't know what came of that. Again, this all kind of started to happen in 2024. It's now 2026. So we're not sure if this story was investigated and found to be bogus. Look, that happens. Sometimes people confess to things that didn't happen, or maybe they remembered seeing something that sounds really crazy, but in retrospect, nothing happened. It could be that Lacey left that night and went home, and this person's just misremembering the date. There's a lot of answers here that could lead to nothing, and it's possible that the investigators, sort of cleared it. It could also be that this is as serious as it sounds like it could be, and they are working it still, and that's why we haven't heard more about it. Obviously, it sounds like there's a lot of people involved. They would want to go interview all those different people if they're still alive and figure out what their part of the story is. So it just feels like Mike and Barb wanted to talk about this, and they sort of blindsided Miles and I with it during our interview. We had never heard about these tapes. We had never heard about these recordings, but we promised to look into them and do with them what we could as we tell this story. This feels like the most responsible thing we can do. I mean, we did consider playing them with altered voices or something like that, but it just all of it felt like we want to protect whoever is brave enough to come forward with this information. And it does seem like a good thing that it's already been handed to the police. So, with that being said, that's all really we feel like we can share about it.
Look, I think the important thing here is this could mean a couple of things, right? If it's real and this person actually was there the night that Lacey disappeared, then it does support the idea that she was killed because there was a belief that she was cooperating with the police, right? There was a belief in this world that Lacey was quote unquote snitching, okay? Now, that's if it's real. If, as Sean said, it's fabricated, I think it's really important to remember this is just showing the kind of stuff that people are willing to do to a family who's suffering the trauma of losing a kid, right? Like this is the kind of stuff that really happens. People do this kind of stuff. They do. They'll make phone calls and say, "Hey, we know who did it." But I will say this is going a really long way. Like, a secret recording that you can actually see video on, and it's clear that the person who's talking doesn't know they're being recorded. And it's definitely like a very elaborate fabrication if this isn't real. I will say that, because Sean and I have both looked at these tapes, and it's a long way to go to try and mess with their family if this is a fake.
One thing to say is that, Mike and Barb, and I'm sure Pam too, but Mike and Barb specifically told us they've received a lot of bogus information over the years. Some of it from people who are really well wishing, some of it probably from pranksters, and some of it from people who just have a genuine wish to be involved, and maybe reaching for something that will get them involved in the case. And a lot of that information leads nowhere. And this could be one. People tell tall tales. People make weird recordings of things, and it's just hard to know. But watching it, the story does sound plausible. It does sound to be a pretty sincere telling of one person's version of events. But again, without knowing what the investigators have turned up or what they've really done with this, it's not really our place to say it's real, it's not real. All we can tell you about is we know the family got it. They sent it to us and we listened to it. And there's yet another version of events that leads to Lacey's death that has nothing to do with her boyfriends or necessarily big shadowy groups of cartels, but more like a social group of people. The one common denominator in all of these things actually being the belief that she may be telling police about other people's criminal business.
Right.
That seems to be the one thread that connects all of these theories together. And I know, again, Lacey herself was concerned with this in her life. She was between a rock and a hard place, Miles, right? I mean,
Yeah.
she was facing very serious charges, involvement in a drive-by shooting where a child almost lost their life. And she wanted to do the right thing and help that investigation. But by doing so, that word just got out, whether it's from articles or TV reporting or just word of mouth, word got out about that. She knew it and she was scared. And every single one of these possible avenues that could have cost her life has a plausible reason for tying back to that. Of course, there's always going to be, did she try to, call an Uber that night and get in the wrong car? Or like, there's always these other things, but it just feels like there's enough plausible stuff here that until some of this is cleared up, I don't really see any evidence to go anywhere else. And what do you think?
I agree. I mean, it's just there's too many stories that kind of lead to the same thing, right? And we can't corroborate any of this, but there's a lot of pieces, right? There's a lot of pieces, and guys, I can't tell you. I mean, well, some of you are probably watching this video, but like we have spoken to a lot of people on the phone, over email, through GMs on Instagram. I mean, people have just been reaching out and giving us stuff. And look, we're vetting folks. We're having long conversations with them. Like Sean and I are not just reading like a blurb and saying, well, that's it, and then coming to you guys and like putting that out there as like what we think happened. Like we've spoken to multiple people, and a lot of the stories are very, very similar. So it does kind of all point in the same direction. But hey, look, Lacey was facing possible prison time, right? Lacey had had a very troubled life. She was facing possible prison time because of the drive-by. Did she party too hard and something that she didn't mean to happen happened that night? And some people got scared and they said, we got to get rid of her body. It's possible, it's possible. There's a lot of things that are possible here. All that we're saying is there's so many things pointing to this other reason for her being killed by somebody that you have to consider it. You have to consider it. I think, kind of like trying to start to wrap this up, something that everybody keeps asking is how come a cause of death hasn't been identified, right? It's been so long and technology has gotten better. And I think we have to remember that her body sat out there for 3 months. And from everything that we've heard, it wasn't even like all in one place. Like it was like a partial find when her body was discovered by that father and son. It wasn't even all of Lacey, right? Like they then did a search and they kind of put her together. So, when that's what happens, it's very, very difficult to find a cause of death quite often. I will say that her father did tell us that her skull was intact, which is interesting. I think that's an interesting fact. We were also told that there was nothing showing bullet or puncture wounds. Now, I'm not sure how to take that, and I feel kind of weird even saying it because we're not hearing it from the authorities, and it's kind of like it's somebody told the family that, somebody told the father that around the time when Lacey's body was found. And you kind of have to take it for what it is. But I mean, she died some way, and she ended up in that area, that obscure area where obviously people were hoping that she wouldn't be found, which she wasn't for 3 months, which is why her body was so deteriorated when she was found. So, you know, she died in some way.
Yeah, and I think again, we touched on it in the beginning, and it's a nice place to say it here too. That complicates things so much for investigators. If they can't say she was shot, if they can't say she was stabbed or strangled or died of a drug overdose, if they literally can't get any of that information, then this is truly a mystery. And the only stuff we have to work with is, okay, if we don't know anything about the death itself, what about Lacey's life right before the death, which is everything we've been talking about? And that's why this leads to so much speculation and there's all these different ideas and theories and people because we don't have the physical part of this beyond just where her remains were found and how long they had been there. I will say it seems like most of the people we've spoken to believe she was placed there after death rather than taken there and killed. But even then, I don't think we know for sure. It just seems like what was found at the scene didn't suggest an execution site, it suggested a dumping site. And suggestions can be wrong too, but that's all we have to work with, right? So, not knowing the condition of the body, only knowing what we know about Lacey's life before her death, it kind of begs the question, what would solve this? I don't know about you, Miles, but it feels like somebody coming forward and giving information would solve this. Operating on the assumption, of course, that there's a law enforcement and a prosecutor's office that is willing to, investigate and prosecute this crime, which we've heard, people's doubts privately and stuff, but on the record, there is no reason to believe that if somebody doesn't come forward and tell the police what happened to Lacey Anderson, that she would not get justice. And that's what I think we can hope happens here. Beyond that, this is a 16 going on 17-year-old case with very little physical evidence and nothing that I can see that will solve it beyond somebody who knows something saying something. Unless I'm missing something, Miles, you tell me.
That's always the best case scenario in a case like this. Someone's moral compass finally changes, someone's conscience, uh, catches up with them, and they decide to do the right thing. And in a case like this, I do believe that there's probably multiple people that know what happened to Lacey. I think that I'm not saying there were multiple people involved, but I think that multiple people probably know. I mean, just based on that confession tape that we've heard and seen, as I said, it had a very strong ring of truth. And, from what was said on that tape, it sounds like there might have been more than one person there, even, the night that she was killed, if she was killed, but, allegedly killed. It's always the case in an unsolved murder or a missing persons case like this that the best thing that could happen is that, either someone's locked up and they're looking for a way out of that. They're looking to lesser their sentence. Hey, I have some information about X. Or someone just finally, sees the light and says, "Hey, too many people are hurting." And I think, Sean, that's, not to get all woo woo here, but I think that's part of why we do what we do here at True Crime Unsolved, right? Because we want to keep these stories alive. And I think this case is a perfect example of how we're not just like screaming out into the void with this. I mean, so many people from this area have watched these videos. I mean, I can't tell you guys. I mean, we have like, what is it, like 120,000 views on the case breakdown now, and we have so many messages from people. So I am pretty sure myself that if there were people involved in Lacey's death and they're in that area, they're probably aware of the coverage that we're doing, right? So the hope would be that like the best thing that could happen out of all of us doing this is that the right person hears it, the right person sees it, and they finally decide, you know what, I can't take it anymore. I don't want to live with this anymore. I'm going to go talk to the right people. Now, as Sean said, the right people would have to be willing to listen, and the right people would have to be willing to actually take action. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, if all of that corruption stuff is true, who knows? Who knows? Maybe that's already happened. Maybe somebody's already gotten shook up and gone and talked to the authorities and it didn't go anywhere. It's so hard to say. I mean, there's so many things. As you can see, that's why we had to do this extra video, guys, because there's not just usually we have like there's extra suspects that we can't get to in a case breakdown, and we decide like, hey, let's do an addendum, because there's other people that were looked at. We didn't have time to get to them, but this is beyond that. It's there's so many elements to this story. There's so many theories around it. There's so much alleged layers of corruption in this area, from the cartel thing to the possible collusion with the local authorities that it's really hard to say. I do have hope that someone will come forward that Lacey's case will break, but I think it's going to be quite interesting to find out what actually happened, if somebody does crack. I guess the only other thing that could happen is if the authorities are doing their job and they are really trying to solve it, is, with DNA technology has advanced quite a bit since Lacey died. And if the authorities went back and, retested her remains, I don't know. I don't know what the contamination period is. I don't know how well her remains have been stored or anything like that. But I guess there is always a possibility that like there could be some breakthrough and some new evidence could be found that way. I don't know. What do you think, Sean?
I think what's really encouraging for me about this case is just the fact that so many people still care and so many people remember. And Miles and I have really tried to find our way through telling Lacey's story as best we could by talking to her family, by reading what was available. and by working with information from you guys, from all the people in Madison County and in Norfolk who knew Lacey, who remembered Lacey, and even some of you who never met her in your life, but just wanted us to understand different elements of this story in this context. And then you'll notice through these videos, we've come in with clarifications on things when we got better information. We've had to say, okay, we learned that we heard this, but now we know that. And we want to thank you for your patience in working with us through this story that's 16 years old and takes place in a place we've never been to. We could only have done it with everybody's help to the level that we have. So thank you for sitting with us as we try to find the truth and get to it. It's ultimately about really just bringing attention back to Lacey and her family. These are people who deserve justice. Lacey herself deserves justice. And I think everything we've done has been in service of trying to get answers for that. I do understand us covering this story has made quite a bit of an impact in the area from what we're hearing. It has shaken some things up for some people, but it's all in service of trying to do the right thing for someone who lost their life and has not yet gotten justice for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And listen, we appreciate you guys so much. We appreciate everyone who's come into our channel because of Lacey's case. We've gotten so many new subscribers, so many people are watching these, and we really, really, really just want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating. And yeah, let's keep Lacey's name alive and let's try to get this case solved.
Absolutely. Well, with that being said, we will see you guys on the next one and in the comments. And we thank you so much for taking the time to follow us on this story.
Thanks, everybody.